We are entering one of the last portals of spiritual action of 2025, and the waxing gibbous moon in Aries brings an energy that will not return in this cycle. If you've been feeling a restlessness in your chest, a desire to start something, but it's as if something invisible is holding you back, this message is for you. It's not anxiety. It's not ordinary fear. It is the sign of your soul's calling. In up to 2 days, spiritual doors will open, but only those who dare to take the first step with sacred courage will cross. This is no longer the time to wait for the perfect moment. The moment is now. There's a quiet, lingering thought that follows you lately, a feeling that you're meant for more. Not in an arrogant way, but in that subtle, intuitive sense that something inside of you is ready to be seen. You imagine the recognition, the satisfaction of doing what you love and finally being acknowledged for it. And yet, the days keep slipping by. The ideas stay on paper. The dreams, half-built. There's a hesitation that doesn't quite make sense, especially because the desire is so clear. But if you look closer, you might find that it isn't a lack of clarity. It's the illusion that everything has to be flawless before you begin. Perfectionism wears many faces. Sometimes it looks like planning. Sometimes it sounds like just not the right time. But beneath all those polished justifications, there's often a quieter emotion hiding in plain sight. Fear. Not the dramatic, life-altering kind. The soft, invisible kind. The fear of putting your gifts out into the world and being misunderstood. The fear of taking the first step and not doing it right. But perfection isn't the path to greatness. Momentum is. And this moment, messy, uncertain, unpolished, is more than enough. This lunar phase in Aries doesn't wait. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need conditions to be ideal. It simply moves. Not because it's fearless, but because it's willing. And somewhere within you, that same energy exists. The part of you that knows the next chapter won't write itself. The part that's tired of holding back. The part that would rather make mistakes than keep waiting for a version of yourself that doesn't need edits. There is no perfect moment coming. There is only the sacred now, raw, real, and ready. And when you meet it with imperfect action, something remarkable happens. You become visible. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped hiding. You've grown in ways most people will never fully see. You've carried visions no one else could hold, nurtured ideas in silence, and kept moving through doubts that weren't even yours to carry. There's a part of you that knows what it means to wait, not just patiently, but strategically. You've observed the landscape, learned the rules, waited for the timing to align. And still, something inside feels unfinished. Not because you're lacking, but because you're delaying your arrival. There's a fine line between preparation and postponement, between trusting the process and hiding behind it. And at some point, all the strategy becomes a shield. You tell yourself you're not quite ready, that one more piece needs to fall into place, that you're only waiting for clarity or a sign or the moment where everything clicks. But if you're honest, that moment keeps moving just out of reach. Like a mirage, like perfection whispering, not yet, again and again. But there's something ancient awakening in you now. A flicker of fire that doesn't crave approval, only movement. This Aries moon doesn't deal in hesitation. It disrupts the endless rehearsals. It breaks the loop of almost. It reminds you that sometimes power doesn't feel like confidence. It feels like choosing to act before you believe you're ready. That maybe the breakthrough doesn't come after everything is polished. Maybe it arrives the moment you allow it to be raw. The truth is, some of your most important turning points won't look like victories at first. They'll look like messy beginnings, uncomfortable steps, imperfect actions that go unnoticed by the world, but change everything inside of you. Because when you stop waiting to be enough and just step forward, even a little, something shifts. Not outside, within. And suddenly, the world doesn't seem so hard to reach. There's a part of you that's been rehearsing your next step for far too long. Going over the details in your mind, refining, adjusting, imagining how it should look once everything falls into place. But something about that inner rehearsal is starting to feel heavy. What once felt like devotion now feels like delay. And the truth is, you were never meant to arrive fully polished. You were meant to arrive real. The craving for recognition isn't shallow. It's rooted in something deeper. The desire to be seen in your wholeness, not just for what you do, but for who you are when you show up with heart. And that part of you is exhausted from waiting. waiting for the conditions to be ideal, waiting to be more prepared, more refined, more in control. But control is often just a disguise worn by fear. It tells you to wait because it's safer to stay invisible than to risk being misunderstood. And yet, the universe doesn't respond to waiting. It responds to energy in motion. This current lunar moment in Aries ignites a different kind of call, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet one that whispers, "Start anyway," with the page unfinished, with the doubt still lingering, with nothing but your own willingness to show up as you are. The most magnetic version of you isn't the perfect one. It's the one who dares to be seen in progress. The one who steps out mid-sentence, mid-doubt, mid-healing. That version of you carries a rare type of authority, the kind that doesn't ask for permission to exist, the kind that isn't waiting to be validated before beginning. What's stirring now isn't urgency. It's alignment. It's the fire that says, move not because everything is certain, but because you are. And maybe that's what courage looks like today. Not fearlessness, not mastery, just presence. Just the bold, quiet act of no longer postponing who you came here to be. Courage isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like bold leaps or fearless declarations. Sometimes it shows up in quieter forms, like shaky hands still reaching forward, or the voice that cracks when you speak your truth, but you speak it anyway. You've likely been taught to believe that bravery means being unaffected, unbothered, composed. But real courage is far less aesthetic. It's messy, it trembles, and it still chooses to move. There's a version of you that only emerges when pressure rises. A version that doesn't need certainty to act, only honesty. Honesty with yourself. Honesty about what you want, even when it's inconvenient. And most importantly, honesty about what you're no longer willing to postpone. Because despite the masks you wear to keep it all together, there's a fire in you that's tired of waiting for confidence to arrive before it begins. This Aries moon doesn't remove fear, it brings it closer. Not to paralyze you, but to remind you that fear is not your enemy. It's just an echo of the part of you that still believes safety comes from staying small. But something deeper is taking up space now. A sacred unrest. A quiet refusal to keep diluting your voice or your vision. You're not here to be untouched by fear. You're here to walk through it with your whole soul intact. This isn't the kind of phase where you're asked to feel ready. It's where you're asked to feel real. And that means letting your heartbeat guide you, even when it races. It means standing in the doorway of uncertainty and walking through anyway. Because the truth is, you don't build courage in the absence of fear. You build it in motion, when you decide that trembling doesn't mean turning back. You were never meant to live only in the calm. You were meant to meet the chaos and still move forward. Not in defiance of fear, but in devotion to what matters more. There's a subtle threshold between who you've been and who you're becoming, and it rarely feels like a grand transformation. More often, it feels like standing on the edge of something unfamiliar with your pulse rising and your breath catching in your throat. You tell yourself to wait until you feel more sure, more stable, more prepared. But there's a truth unfolding now that doesn't fit into that timeline. You may not feel ready, and still, it's time. The instinct to pause isn't weakness. It's human. But when that pause becomes a pattern, when hesitation starts to shape your identity, it becomes something else. A quiet agreement to stay behind your own potential. You weren't made to linger in the almost. And even though your body may tighten at the thought of being seen, exposed, vulnerable, there is something louder rising inside you. A knowing. A clarity that doesn't arrive in perfect sentences, but pulses through you in waves of urgency that say, go anyway. The lunar energy in Aries doesn't push you to bulldoze your way forward. It invites you into sacred motion, the kind that's rooted not in recklessness, but in deep, inner alignment. It asks you to honor the fear, not avoid it. To carry it with tenderness, but not let it dictate your steps. This is the kind of courage that's built in real time, with no script, no spotlight, just a heartbeat and a choice. Every time you move despite the uncertainty, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was never meant to be hidden. Each tremble becomes a thread in the tapestry of your becoming. And while others may only see the outcome, you'll know the truth, that it was never about being fearless. It was always about being devoted. Devoted enough to show up. Devoted enough to stay in motion. Devoted enough to walk through the fire and keep your spirit intact. There's a quiet moment that comes before every act of courage, a breath, a pause, a flicker of doubt. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel powerful. In fact, it often feels like the opposite, small, uncertain, tender. But in that space between hesitation and action, something sacred begins to stir. Not because you're sure of the outcome, but because you're finally choosing to honor what's alive inside you, even if it shakes. You've likely learned how to carry fear with grace, how to smile through it, function with it, plan around it. You've survived with it in the background, letting it shape your choices in subtle ways. And still, here you are, pulled toward something more. Not louder, not bolder, just truer. That pull isn't asking you to eliminate the fear. It's asking you to no longer let it make your decisions for you. This lunar cycle in Aries brings a different kind of medicine. It doesn't promise comfort. It offers ignition. And with it, the reminder that you can be afraid and still committed. That you can feel unsteady and still aligned. That the most honest steps are rarely the cleanest. They're the ones you take when your voice shakes, your knees buckle, but your soul says now. You don't need to force bravery. You don't need to silence your fear. You only need to remember that fear is not a verdict. It's a signpost. It means you're near something meaningful, something that touches your edge, something that matters enough to risk. And that risk? It's not recklessness. It's reverence. It's the sacred act of no longer shrinking to fit the version of you that was built for safety, not expansion. Every time you choose movement over mastery, presence over perfection, breath over avoidance, you deepen your roots. You rise without armor. And you begin, not because the fear has gone silent, but because you finally stopped letting it speak louder than your calling. You've always carried something unique, a way of seeing the world, connecting dots others miss, sensing timing before it's logical. Maybe you didn't call it leadership. Maybe you were taught to play it safe, to be humble, to not want too much. But there's a quiet authority in you that's been speaking for years now. And each time you shrink yourself to fit into what's expected, that voice doesn't disappear. It just grows quieter, until moments like this, when it rises again with unmistakable clarity. This isn't about chasing a title or proving your worth through performance. It's about remembering your right to take up space, to offer what you know, even if it doesn't come with credentials, to express what you see, even if others don't yet understand it. Under this Aries moon, something deep within you is being reignited, not from ego, but from soul. Not to impress, but to embody. There's a false story many sensitive, gifted people carry, that they must earn their seat at the table, that someone else will grant permission when they're qualified enough. But the truth is, you were never meant to wait for a nod of approval to step into your role. You were meant to lead from the inside out, not because you have all the answers, but because you have the presence to hold the questions. You weren't born to blend in. You weren't meant to rehearse your light until it's flawless. You were made to lead by being fully yourself, raw, intuitive, evolving. The kind of leadership that doesn't command from above, but invites from beside. That doesn't compete, but creates. That doesn't scream, but resonates. This isn't the time to hesitate. Not because the world is watching, but because your own soul is. And it's not asking for perfection, only permission. Not from them, from you. There comes a point when staying small begins to ache more than the risk of being seen. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. The version of you that once found comfort in the background now feels restless. Not out of vanity, but because there's something within you that's outgrown invisibility. You've spent so long refining your voice, your ideas, your perspective, quietly, diligently, with care. But now, the silence around you no longer feels like safety. It feels like suppression. You were never meant to be neutral in a world that needs your fire. The clarity you carry, the insight you've earned through your lived experience, it's not accidental. It wasn't given to you to be kept hidden in your journals or confined to private conversations. There's a calling now to step forward, not as someone who's figured it all out, but as someone willing to show up in truth, even while still becoming. The current lunar rhythm in Aries doesn't reward hesitation. It mirrors the part of you that's instinctual, bold, willing. The part that knows leadership isn't about authority, it's about resonance. When you speak from the place in you that's no longer negotiating your worth, something shifts. Not just for you, but for those around you. Your presence becomes permission. Your authenticity becomes a signal. Your courage becomes a quiet revolution. You don't need to push to prove you belong. You already do. Not in the future. Not when you're more polished or prepared. Now, you belong in the conversation. You belong at the table. You belong in rooms that match your vision, and in rooms where your presence will reshape the vision. The more you align with your truth, the less tolerable it becomes to pretend. And in that tension, your real power begins to rise. There's a quiet kind of leadership that doesn't announce itself. It arrives through presence, not performance. And that presence, the one you've been shaping through experience, intuition, and resilience, is no longer content with being subdued. Not because it wants attention, but because it's no longer willing to dim for the comfort of others. You've spent enough time softening your edges, minimizing your insight, folding yourself smaller to make space where there was never room for your full truth. That season is closing. What's rising now isn't arrogance. It's alignment. It's the inner voice that no longer asks, "Who am I to lead?" but begins to wonder, "What happens if I don't?" You were never meant to follow paths that don't resonate just to stay agreeable. You're not here to echo other people's truths while your own goes unheard. And while there may still be moments of doubt, the deeper knowing is clear. Your presence changes things. Quietly, powerfully, irreversibly. This Aries moon calls back the part of you that led long before you had the language for it. The part that saw through noise, that moved with instinct, that held vision in the absence of validation. That part was never lost, only quieted. And now, it's stirring again, not with demands, but with direction. A deep, rooted sense that leadership isn't something you step into when you're finally enough. It's something you embody when you stop apologizing for who you already are. You don't need to prove your readiness. You've lived your way into it. Every chapter that felt like a detour, every moment you bit your tongue, every time you held space for others while denying your own, all of it brought you here. And from this place, you don't need to force anything. You only need to allow. Allow your voice to rise. Allow your presence to lead. Allow the world to meet the version of you that no longer waits for permission to be seen. There's a specific kind of heaviness that lingers after disappointment. Not just the weight of what didn't work, but the quiet echo of what it made you believe about yourself. Maybe you once moved boldly, with heart wide open and hope lighting the way. And when things didn't unfold the way you imagined, it left a mark. Not always visible, but deep enough to make you question your timing, your intuition, maybe even your worth. You started to approach new opportunities with more caution, telling yourself you were just being wise. But sometimes wisdom becomes armor, and armor becomes a cage. Still, even after everything, your desire hasn't disappeared. It may have gone quiet. It may speak in whispers now instead of fire, but it's alive. And that's no accident. Because this moment isn't asking you to forget what didn't work. It's asking you to return to what still matters. To let the fire be reborn, not from naivety, but from integration. You are not who you were when you first tried. You're someone who's learned, who's shed, who's grown into a version of yourself that doesn't chase certainty, only alignment. The lunar current in Aries doesn't ask for guarantees. It asks for renewal. It brings with it the sacred truth that trying again isn't regression, it's resurrection. It's the soul's quiet insistence that your path didn't disappear just because it got harder to follow. You are allowed to begin again, and not as someone who failed, but as someone who carries more truth in their bones this time. There's power in returning, in walking back toward what once stung, but now calls. Not out of desperation, but because you finally understand. Your mission was never about being flawless. It was about becoming. And becoming isn't linear, it's cyclical. Each time you rise, you bring more of yourself with you. And this time, you don't just hope. You know. There's a distinct ache that comes with remembering the times you tried and came up short. Not because you regret the effort, but because of how deeply you believed. You gave your energy, your vision, your full presence, and for reasons that may never fully make sense, things didn't unfold the way you imagined. What followed wasn't just disappointment. It was erosion, a slow, almost imperceptible doubt that began to creep into the spaces where your certainty once lived. Maybe you told yourself you'd be wiser next time, more measured, less vulnerable, and without realizing it, you started protecting yourself not just from failure, but from possibility, from hope, from the unknown magic that lives in beginnings. But beginnings aren't only for the naive. They're for the brave, They're for the ones who are willing to bring the fullness of who they've become into a space they once had to leave behind. This Aries moon carries a rare kind of energy, not the rush of reckless action, but the courage of sacred return. It doesn't ask you to erase the past or pretend the pain didn't happen. It invites you to integrate it, to see the past version of you not as someone who failed, but as someone who made it possible for this moment to exist. Because without that version of you, the one who dared to try, this new, wiser version wouldn't be here now, holding a different kind of power. You've changed. What used to feel like collapse now feels like clarity. What once broke you now builds your threshold for truth. This isn't about second chances in the traditional sense. This is about reclaiming the parts of yourself you thought had to be buried with what didn't work. It's about rising from your own ashes, not to recreate what was, but to honor what still calls to you. This time, you bring not only the dream, but the depth. There's a quiet threshold between letting go and trying again, a liminal space where memory meets desire. You remember what didn't unfold, the versions of yourself you had to release, the doors that didn't open. You remember how deeply it hurt to give your all and watch it unravel. And yet, beneath the scar tissue, something persistent remains. Not the naive kind of hope that pretends the past didn't happen, but the rooted kind that knows healing isn't the opposite of pain. It's the meaning that grows from it. You didn't lose your fire. It changed shape. It cooled, then simmered, then waited. And now, with this Aries moon as witness, it begins to rise again, not with urgency, but with intention. There's no need to rush. What's returning isn't just your willingness to act, but your ability to act from a place that holds your entire story, the joy, the ache, the resilience. This is where sacred courage lives, not in starting fresh, but in starting deeper. What you once called failure was never a final chapter. It was a redirection, a reshaping, a necessary unraveling that asked you to strip away the roles you outgrew. And though it may have felt like loss, it was always preparing you to come back stronger, not hardened, but refined, not guarded, but grounded. Trying again doesn't mean replicating what once was. It means standing at a familiar doorway with a new presence, one that no longer seeks approval, one that no longer believes it must prove its worth to be chosen. The version of you that returns now does so with new roots, clearer boundaries, and a deeper sense of what actually matters. This is your invitation to re-enter, not the same path, but the same calling, seen through wiser eyes. Not because time has healed everything, but because time has made you ready to carry it differently. Not heavier, just truer. There's something magnetic about truth when it's embodied, not spoken for effect, not polished for approval, but lived. You've spent enough time editing yourself to fit into spaces that never truly saw you, holding back pieces of your voice to maintain harmony, downplaying your instincts so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But the cost of shrinking for acceptance is a quiet disconnection from your own vitality. And now, that disconnection has become impossible to ignore. The more you align with what's real, the more inauthenticity starts to feel unbearable. You can't keep pretending your fire is a candle, neat, contained, safe. You weren't built for surface-level ambition. Your soul wants depth, integrity, meaning that reverberates through your work, not just around it. This isn't about being perfect or having it all figured out. It's about showing up whole, raw when needed, bold when called, silent when sacred. It's about standing in your work without bending yourself into someone else's image of success. This Aries moon isn't interested in appearances. It burns away the performance. It leaves only essence. And from that place, your career becomes more than a path. It becomes a mirror of your becoming. Every time you speak with conviction, every time you say no when it's easier to please, every time you trust your inner rhythm over external pressure, the universe rearranges itself around your authenticity. You weren't meant to chase validation. You were meant to embody resonance. And when you do, doors open, not because you pushed, but because you finally stopped hiding. Opportunities that once felt distant begin to appear, not as rewards, but as reflections. What finds you now will match the energy of your truth, not the mask you used to wear. And that truth, it doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand.